And so he's going to tell us ways that we can discern reality from make-believe land. That's one of the main themes of this class. Reality from make-believe land. And the guest lecturer on Thursday is a medical doctor, and he's going to tell us how we can do that in the medical arena. So, again, give a warm welcome to Matt Thornton. And just before we begin, have you ever seen anybody walk through walls or knock anybody out without touching them?
I have yet to see that, no. Thank you very much. I guess the starting point for me when I talk to people about skepticism as it relates to martial arts, I try and sum it up into a one-word meme that hopefully you guys will take and spread throughout the world continuously, which is aliveness. And that distinguishes between what works and what doesn't work. So if you look, we don't want to use mixed martial arts as a model for everything. The bottom line is, when you put two people in a cage, you're actually trying to knock each other out and choke each other unconscious. It's fairly realistic as far as one-to-one combat unarmed. And in that environment, you're going to see the same delivery systems, which is a term I prefer to use over styles over and over again. So you're going to see mixed martial arts going to use boxing. Because when you ball up your fist, you want to punch somebody in the face. Those are the body mechanics that are proven to work. When they take somebody down, they're going to use primarily wrestling. So if you think you have better takedowns than a wrestler, you have a wrestling team here, you can try it out. And when they hit the ground, it's usually Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or some combination of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is what I do. Those blended together form mixed martial arts. But if you ask yourself why those arts, if you see this, you constantly see the same arts used in MMA, Muay Thai, boxing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling, those arts, and why you're not going to see these guys or traditional Kung Fu or Aikido or Tai Chi or 99.999% of martial arts. The distinction is in the training methods. And in classical martial arts, which I'll just call traditional martial arts for the rest of the lecture, the typical training method is what I would refer to as a dead pattern. So somebody's going to pretend to throw a punch at you, they kind of lock it out, they stay there. If you watch the feeder instead of watching the person that's doing the demonstration, you'll always be able to figure this part out. Kind of lock themselves out, and then the other person does super cool shit, and they just go flying. And that's nothing more than choreography. So if you give me or anybody a good Hollywood choreographer an hour, I can make you look exactly the same way, as long as somebody just goes like this and locks their punch out for you. And that's, if you look at how Aikido trains, if you look at how karate trains, if you look at how Taekwondo, on and on and on, that's what they do. And then they take those movements and they memorize those movements in preset forms, which they just repeat continuously, absent a resisting opponent. And because it's absent a resisting opponent, what's not incorporated in there is any sense of timing. There's no resistance, so as soon as they go up against a resisting opponent who's obviously not choreographed and who's going to do whatever they can to try and to hurt you, all that goes out the window. Now, if you look at boxing, in boxing you have to learn the basic movements like you do anything else without resistance. You practice it a few times, and then you work it on some equipment, make sure you have the mechanics, and then you start working against somebody who's punching you back, and they're moving around, and it's not choreographed, and that's why you can learn how to punch somebody in the face when you box. Wrestling is the same way. If you want to learn a good training method, all you have to do for martial arts, all you have to do is join the wrestling team here. You take martial arts and train it the way the wrestling team trains wrestling, what you do will be functional. And over a period of time, it will begin to look like what we do in MMA. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is, of course, the same. The nice thing about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, unlike Muay Thai and boxing and even Judo, I would say, is it's pretty gentle. So you can train even when you get older like me. I'll be training hopefully until I'm 80 and not be crippled. And boxing and Muay Thai isn't something I really want my children to do because of the brain damage. But Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu you can continuously do, but the cool thing about it is the first day you come into the gym, you can go 100% on the mat. You're welcome to come into the gym, step on the mat, try as hard as you can to choke, tap, do whatever you want to one of the other students and see what happens. And they will, if they're one of the more advanced students that's been there for years, they will gently dominate and control you, and there won't be anything you can do about it. And that's what makes Jiu-Jitsu very cool. So in that sense, it's the literal translation is the gentle art. That's what makes it gentle, is you can control somebody without elbowing them in the face. But it's also about efficiency. It can also translate as efficiency. We're trying to use the minimum amount of effort to gain the maximum amount of advantage when it comes to controlling somebody who, like I said, is resisting 100%. But that distinction, you'll notice between the arts that I mentioned that we know work, and that you'll see in full contact sports, and the arts which I would refer to as fantasy-based martial arts, which you saw like the extreme edge of them here on the videos. That distinction is to be found in how you train, not necessarily what you train. So sometimes people will say, I've heard traditional martial artists, people say, well, we do sparring too. Can I see some? And then when you watch, if you watch them spar, what it looks like is, if there's two of them, it looks like two people trying to do mixed martial arts that have no idea how to fight. Two people trying to box, wrestle, and do jiu-jitsu who just don't know how to box, wrestle, and do jiu-jitsu. That's what it looks like, because that's what fighting is. So that's the difference. So you have functional delivery systems, you have fantasy-based martial arts, and the main thing is training with resistance. And that resistance, that resisting opponent who's not coming at you in a choreographed pattern, that's the self-correcting mechanism. That's the connection you have to science, that's the connection you have to critical thinking. It's going to reflect back at you your delusions. I mean, you can, it's the beautiful, Sam Harris wrote an article about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. If any of you like Sam Harris, you can check his blog, came out a month ago, that I thought was fantastic. But the beautiful thing about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or any of these arts is, especially Jiu-Jitsu, because like I said, you can do it without getting hurt, is you can't walk into my gym or any other Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym, actually, you know, engage in the activity with us and walk out delusional. I mean, you can, but you'd have to be pretty crazy. You're going to find out for yourself exactly what you can do, and in my opinion, more importantly than that, exactly what you cannot do. You know, you're not going to have any delusions about being able to beat up 5 football players in the parking lot. And that I think is very important, because the downside to all this, the dangerous part about this, it's all kind of fun and games until you get somebody that's delusional enough, like this older gentleman that actually thought for whatever reason that he could do that. But I have literally thousands of emails and met all kinds of people from around the world who were put in Kung Fu or karate when they were a little kid for various reasons, and then actually got in a fight in high school or out in a parking lot at 7-Eleven or somewhere, like, holy shit, this stuff doesn't work. And that's not the time to find that out. So it's actually a dangerous thing to be messing around with. So that's it, aliveness. If you add aliveness in, what you're doing is going to work. Doesn't mean you have to train brutal. My gym is filled with people. I have quite a few, actually some of my best competitive athletes are females. I've got 2 that I think will be world champions here in a few months. I've got people that train with me that are 60 and 70. You just have to be smart about how you train. Like any athletic activity, you have to keep yourself in decent shape and moderate the resistance. So when I talk about aliveness and I talk about resisting opponents, I'm not saying all of a sudden you get locked in a cage and some 260-pound single-digit body fat guy comes and tries to knock your head off. That's not how it works. It's like when you lift weights, you start with the bar and then progressively add more and more weight. But even from day one, you can do it safely without having it be in a choreographed pattern. It does not need to be contrived. And that's one of the huge fallacies of traditional martial arts. And that's actually, I think, that idea that things have to be in a choreographed pattern like that is how these arts procreate, for lack of a better word, how they survive as they pass on that myth. So anyway, that's my speech. I'll be happy to take any questions. Yes?
So where do you primarily train people or athletes?
I have a gym here in Portland, Oregon, and then we're part of I have a bigger organization around the world. So we have gyms in Iceland and Sweden and various places, but my home is here. So we have a gym here in the Hollywood District that I've had for, I guess, 20 years now. Yes?
How many hours of training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu would you say would take you to be functional?
More than 10,000, but it depends on what you mean by function. So let me give you an example. The 10,000 hour rule, I think, is a pretty good general rule for most activities. And in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you do have a belt system, with, of course, black belt being the one you get at the end. The difference is, for most people in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it takes an average of probably 10 to 12 years to get black belt. And that's not 10 to 12 years of showing up 2 days a week and having a cigarette and talking about martial arts. That's 10 to 12 years of usually 3 to 4 days a week, minimum an hour each time. So we're talking about 2 or 3 hours a week of full-on wrestling against resisting opponents for about 10 to 12 years. And it's a bell curve. So sometimes you'll get exceptional people that'll make it 3 or 4 and they'll go win tournaments, and then you'll have other people that never get there and take 15 years, but the average is probably 10 to 12 years. And now that's very, very, very good, usually. I mean, if you're at that level, the other person has to also play the same game at your level or be, you know, a Division I wrestler or something like that to even be a challenge for you on the mat. If you train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a year or 2 years, and somebody walks in off the street that's a lot bigger and stronger than you but has no ground game whatsoever, they have no wrestling, they've never done BJJ, I don't want to say 100%, but I probably, and if I knew you during that 2 years, I'd be able to make this bet. I'd probably be able to bet my mortgage you'll tap them out 10 times out of 10 times. So one of the problems I have in my gym, I mentioned I have a couple female athletes that are very good, is what I used to do, we don't do this system anymore, but for years what I used to do is somebody would come in and say, yeah, I'm interested in taking a class. I'd be like, yeah, cool, all right, try out class. Jumping on the mat, and then they roll, meaning they wrestle against other people, students in the class. And of course, when you're new and you don't know anything, you get tapped out over and over and over and over and over again, and you submit 1,000 times. It's a process we all have to go through to get good. And a lot of people will quit at that point, but the worst thing for me was to have good female athletes who then will have some big athletic guy walk in and I'll go, yeah, go ahead and roll, and then one of them goes, oh, let me do that guy, and then she chokes him 2 or 3 times, never see that guy again. I can beat out like 80% of my students. But, you know, some of them have been training for 2 or 3 years, and they're able to do that. So, good is a relative term. If you have 2 or 3 years of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu behind you and somebody else doesn't know anything, to them you'll be pretty good. And if most of you that have never done this, if you were to go to a gym and roll with one of the students that's been training for 2 or 3 years and then roll with me, you probably wouldn't even notice the difference. This is going to be a 1 or 2 minute match. Yeah?
Do you train kids, and what age?
Yeah, we train kids. I think a good age to get kids going is probably 6, sometimes 5. It depends on maturity. Usually it's about 6 years old. Jiu-Jitsu is great for kids. They actually do it quite naturally. Very, very good. Yeah?
Can you explain specifically how you overcome size? Because someone my size, I can't imagine even if I trained for, 3, 4, 5 years, if someone 6'2", 6'5" comes off the street, how does that work? How would I overtake someone that size?
Sure, okay. Well, I'm not going to advocate for trying to do that. If it's a self-defense scenario, the first thing you should always do is run away. One of the things that drives me crazy about martial arts is when I see people teaching defense against a knife or Israeli commando defense against somebody has a gun. If somebody has a knife, run. Run. There's no good answer to that. But having said that, let me give you a brief analogy of how this can happen. A few years ago, one of my students brought me in a DVD, which it was pretty awful, but what it was like 2 hours of street fights caught on tape. By street fight, these are fights outside bars, fights in parking lots, fights in 7-Eleven, that kind of thing. All caught on, most of them caught on security cameras. And 9 times out of 10, what you're going to see is you're going to see one person run in and tackle the other one, or they're going to go their head down like this, and they're going to punch like this, right? But as I watched one fight after the other fight after the other fight, I thought to myself, if one person knew how to do a guillotine choke, which is a simple move, one of the basic moves we teach in Jiu-Jitsu, they could win every single one of these fights, because at every point in the fight there's somebody with their head down, lunging forward, wide open for a choke. Now if you have somebody big coming after you that's committed to hurting you, you have a couple options. Run away, let's assume that's not an option. Enough bodily trauma to knock them unconscious, that's never guaranteed, even at my size. One of the stories I tell to illustrate that is one of the people I know from a long time ago is, and most of you are probably way too young for this, but Randall Tex Cobb. He's a movie star. He usually plays a biker. He was in Raising Arizona, mean biker. But he also, for those of you who don't know, used to be a professional boxer. Back in the day, had a heavyweight fight with Larry Holmes when it was 15 rounds. And now Larry Holmes punches harder upside down with his left hand than I ever will in my entire life. He always will. He's Larry Holmes. And Randall stood there Randall has no defense. Randall's defense is getting punched in the face. Randall stood there for 15 rounds getting hit by the man who probably hit harder than anybody in the world at that time, over and over again, and never went down once. And this is a guy that no matter what I did to him with my elbow, my hand, forget all this crap about pressure points, it's all bullshit. I'm never going to be able to knock that guy unconscious, okay? But no matter how much crack he smoked or tequila he had or anything else, if I cut off his blood supply and count to 1,000, 2,000 before I can say 3,000, he'll go unconscious. So if you have somebody that's intent on hurting you and they're not going to run away, you have a choice: major bodily trauma, knocking them unconscious, not always possible, or choke them. And everybody, no matter how big they are, is susceptible to being choked. So in answer to your question, make sure your body is in the superior position. Even if you're on bottom, you try and find a position where you're going to have some leverage, and you go for a choke. And I've been tapped by people a lot smaller than me many times, and that's how they'll do it sometimes. If I make a mistake, if I'm rolling with one of my purple belts, who's, for a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, somebody with 6 or 7 years of training, who's 50 or 60 pounds lighter than me, and knows what I know, and I make a mistake, they will get me. I have to be real careful. So, and then I mentioned the 2 female athletes I have that they'll get me too. If I make a mistake, one of them put my arm up, next thing I know, she's going to be breaking my arm, I'll have to submit, or she's on my back choking me. It's definitely possible. But it's not easy. It's not something you're going to get from a weekend self-defense class. It's good. You know, when I talk, Amanda in particular as an example, is somebody I think will probably take a gold medal this year. She is dedicated. She's in there 3 or 4 days a week. She rolls regularly with men, you know. She has to keep her body in great physical condition to be able to do that. She is a professional athlete for all intents and purposes. And she's put that kind of dedication into it for the last 3 years. So it doesn't come easy, but it's not impossible. What's more important to me, if you're not interested in taking your training to that level, and most people aren't, is that you know what you can't do. That's part of the reason why I don't like those self-defense seminars and martial arts systems. People with false sense of security. Make a lot of noise, run away. If you're not hanging out with morons, then and somebody attacks you, they're probably not interested in somebody that makes a lot of noise anyway, so forth and so on. Yeah.
So is the reason possibly that a lot of students are driven away because they had these delusions or assumptions going into the class before they actually took it, and then they'll sort of experience those corrective mechanisms and then just kind of bolt it out after that?
Yeah, that'd be one reason. Another reason is that some people just can't tap, don't like to tap. I mean, to get good at this art, you have to, myself included, you have to be willing to consistently train with people who are capable of beating you. And you have to lose sometimes. If you're not losing ever, then you're never putting yourself up against that resistance. It's going to increase your timing to get you better. And at the levels that we're talking about, once you have a couple of years of training and you know the same moves I know, the distinction between somebody that's better than you and you is timing. That's the difference. And that timing is hard-earned from resisting opponents. If you're not willing to go through that process, there are just some people who are just like, I'm not going to tap you. I like to think that when I meet those people, I think this is a guy that can never train in my gym, and that's why I don't like him, but I'm not always 100% right. But you have to have the personality where you're just like okay with that, to be okay to be beaten by somebody smaller than you who happens to have trained longer. And if you're not okay with that, then maybe it's not for you. Yes?
Do you think there's a spirituality aspect of what you do?
That's a great question. I do get that question a lot when I talk. I do, but I hate that word. Okay, and I'll tell you why I hate that word. Because that word's associated with 2 things. One is religion, which I consider a substitute word for superstition. And 2, it's equated with, if it's not religion, it's usually equated with some form of New Age mysticism, which is just as bad, in my opinion. But having been in martial arts since I was a kid, I had throughout the years a serious interest in Eastern mysticism, Eastern religion, and I will tell you there are good, positive things, obviously, to be found, I think, empirically testable things in, for example, meditation, or practices like that, and being able to focus your mind and be able to calm down, and any form of athletics that challenges your body, whether it's downhill skiing, snowboarding. You know, the virtue of combat athletics is it challenges your body and your ego, but in a way that sometimes solitary sports don't. But having said that, any sport taken to a certain level will put you in a state where you can experience altered states of consciousness. that can have benefits if they translate into positive changes in your behavior as they relate to other people, or an increased sense of compassion. And there's obviously things in Buddhism, for example, ideas related to desire and fear and attachment and those kind of things, which, if I think studied by psychology, if you took the cultural superstition out of it, which is a whole lot of it, by the way, I know everybody likes the Dalai Lama, and he's a very nice man, but if you look at Tibetan Buddhism as a whole, it's like 99, it's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. So if you were to take all the superstition out of it, what you have left, I think, would be something that psychologists and psychiatrists would be able to study, and it would be beneficial. But there's work involved in that. The best article, actually, you ever read by that was published in an awful magazine called Tricycle about 10 years ago, but it was by Sam Harris, called Killing the Buddha. And that's what he was advocating that people do, is if you can look at something like Buddhism and take out all the superstition. So where I think these martial arts go wrong is, at their core, the core problem philosophically, I mean, the core problem physically is a lack of aliveness, like I said. The core problem philosophically is they're pretending to know things they do not know. If I tell you, or anybody else does, that they know what happens after you die, I am pretending to know something I do not know. If I tell you that there's some intrinsic sense of justice in the universe called karma, I'm pretending to know something I do not know, because as far as I know, there's no empirical evidence for that. And that's a clear line. And when you cross that line, I think things go bad for the individual that's crossing the line, and for everybody else that's credulous enough to listen to them. But if you don't cross that line, and somebody says, well, what happens after? I don't know what happens after you die. Is there a sense of justice to the world? I don't think so. Evidence doesn't seem to show it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't, try and put out good material. If you don't cross that line, and you're able to read Buddhist material, you're able to engage in meditation, you're able to do those kind of things, and I think there's a lot of benefit that can come from that. Having said all that, I think the benefits related to, for lack of a better term, let's just say self-actualization that people are talking about, that people like to attach to martial arts, are going to be found only when you take the athletic model. Only when you train with resistance, only when you train with aliveness, because otherwise what you're doing is based on a fantasy to begin with, and it's not going to be healthy. And I don't think it has to be martial arts to receive those benefits, like I said before. I think it can be any form of athletic activity. It's Joseph Campbell's famous quote, "The only spiritual experience I ever had was in athletics." I think a lot of people experience that, a lot of athletes experience that, because athletes exist in a certain culture. They don't talk about it, but it's there. It's empirical, it can be studied, it's brain state, I think it's neuroscience. I think it's useful, but the line to not cross is to not pretend to know things. You do not pretend to know things you don't actually know. I think as long as we follow that guideline, we're all good. Yes?
Can you demonstrate an MMA move on Pete?
On Pete? Tell you what, I'll have Pete demonstrate an MMA move on me. Just one
So do the guillotine.
I'll do the guillotine. Let's say, for sake of argument, I decide to tackle Pete and I leave my neck exposed. You can put on a pretty simple choke, just do a basic guillotine, and when I tap, he'll stop, hopefully, otherwise I'll
I don't know about this. Should we move the table in case it goes like
Ready?
Oh.
Yeah, that's it. It's not super exciting, but that's a simple, that's a choke. That's an air choke. It takes a little longer. I tapped early because I have a cold and I don't feel like walking home with a sore throat. If you were to count 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, and he were to lift up like a window shade like this and stop, I would pass out. So, I mean, you can do whatever you want. Anything else? Yes?
Is it possible, you say that spiritual experience to do with athletics, do you think that people also can get that through maybe like music?
Absolutely, absolutely. And those kind of, I'm borrowing a bunch of Maslow's terminology, but those kind of peak experiences I do think are possible. I think I'm in case you didn't figure it out, a pretty, what would be the word, strident atheist. I think religion is a plague. But having said that, I think one of the mistakes we make as atheists is if we diminish those those kind of experiences, I just hate to attach the word spiritual to it. Because then, you know, the last time I walked into a New Age bookstore, don't even get me started. Had astrology and crystal healing and, you know, I can't imagine bigger wastes of time for people. One lifetime, don't waste it on head astrology. But yes, music for sure. Art, athletics, drugs. There's, you know, anybody that's had a great ecstasy experience, or those of us that enjoy the pleasures of LSD. I mean, I'm not going to get another job, I can say that. Mushrooms, so forth and so on. There are, and if you look back, the artists and people that have taken advantage of those kind of experiences, you know, we'd have to get rid of 50% of what we consider good art if we want to diminish those experiences. So I in no way ever intend to diminish those experiences. It's just, for me, that line is very, very, very clear. It's just, don't pretend to know things you don't know. And the problem people have with meditation or those kind of experiences is they'll have these great experiences of, I don't want to get off on a tangent and bore everybody, but you'll have these experiences where you'll lose a sense of self-identity, you'll have an expanded sense of self, on and on. And then you come back from that, or you come down from that, or however you got to that, and you'll say, okay, so therefore the universe is like this. And you'll make an empirical statement about the nature of consciousness. You'll all of a sudden become a dualist, and you'll think consciousness exists separate from the brain. And that's the error in human reasoning. At that point, you've taken it to, you've gone from a beautiful experience, and you've started to pretend to know things you don't know. And that's the role of science. So you can make that hypothesis, then, you know, we have to study it. But you're absolutely, for sure, music. Anything else? Yes?
To talk about the fantasy representing for a second.
Yeah.
I'm curious, really, how much of that is deception versus psychosomatic, or how much of it is, you know, they want to please their masters, so they pretend to go down after one punch or whatever it is. How much of it is psychosomatic, like they really believe that they should go down after one punch, so they like legitimately feel it?
That is a fascinating question. I wonder about a lot myself. I do not know the answer. I'll tell you, I've seen this video. I do Pete's, you know, every semester. Once a semester, I've done this class, and I've watched this video. I've seen this video countless times. And what I want to see is I want a follow-up interview. That's what I want. I want somebody to go back to this guy and interview and say, do you still think you have magic powers? And even more interesting, I'd like to see him just an unbiased interviewer who wasn't posing any, you know, wasn't coming with any, just interview the students. I'm just so curious about that. You know, what do you do? So you were a student before that, you thought you were falling down because he was hitting you without touching you, and then you see this. And what goes through your mind? I'm fascinated by it. I don't know the answer. It's obviously a delusion. It's just some kind of shared delusion. I don't know what the mechanics are brain-wise behind why it works. But it is interesting, and I think we all have to be careful, because to some degree or another, we're probably all susceptible to it. Probably, hopefully not at that level. But at one level or another, we're obviously susceptible to being fooled like that. I wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't know.
Anybody else, any questions?
Yes?
I was going to ask, is it a misconception of maybe our American culture about the traditional martial arts? Because I mean, like as far as I know, like they've been doing Tai Chi for thousands of years and it works. So how come it doesn't work?
It's an interesting question. Let me take that in two parts, okay? So the first part is a historical question about what happened to martial arts in the United States, which is interesting, and that you can trace that back, if you want to talk about what we now consider to be popular martial arts, to the post-World War II generation. Because you had a lot of soldiers went overseas in places like Japan and came back, and so I can go into that. That's a discussion of the training methods that they brought back. The other part of that is the statement where you said they've been doing it for thousands of years, therefore it works. That's a fallacy. So they've also been doing traditional Chinese medicine for thousands of years, and that doesn't work either. But that is the cause. One of my problems with that is the cause of a lot of the animals going extinct on this planet. I mean, every day they're killing rhinos in Africa and cutting off their horns because the Chinese have a belief that if you grind up a rhino horn, it can help give you an erection. It's like their version of Viagra. Rhino horn, as many of you are sure science students, is, I think it's made of the same thing our fingernails are made. So they might as well be eating human fingernails. It's a superstition. It's been a superstition for a long time. There's no facts behind it, but it's going to cause the extinction of rhinos probably on the planet. So there is a danger. It's not just that it's a fallacy. There's a danger to those kind of fallacies when we assume because something's been perpetuated for a long time that it must work. You know, things perpetuate themselves generation upon generation, not because they're functional, but because they're good at replicating. That's just evolution, whether we're talking about ideas or organisms. So these ideas are good at replicating. That doesn't mean they work. And martial arts is a prime example of that. Now, to answer the second part of your question, or the historical part, if you trace back Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to its start, it was a Japanese immigrant who was a student of Kano, who was the founder of judo. And that organization and his initial group of black belts did essentially kind of what we do now. They did a form of mixed martial arts, and Kano's great innovation, as far as I understand it historically, to the martial arts was he said, hey, let's take Jiu-Jitsu. It was all called Jiu-Jitsu back then. It was all one lump term. And let's train with liveness. Let's practice against resisting opponents. And he created a group of guys who were very good, and they put out a challenge, a lot like the Gracies did, and they beat everybody. And one of his black belts wanted to immigrate to Brazil, and so in return for help with immigration, he taught the Gracie family judo or jiu-jitsu back then. And that's how the art spread there. And in Brazil, you have an environment where if I was, fuck you, and we get in a fight here on the floor and we're rolling around, nobody else is going to come kick me in the head. So, you know, it's like it's two guys fighting, leave them alone. And in that kind of culture, it was the perfect environment in terms of evolution for the delivery system of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to evolve to what it is today. And now we have mixed martial arts, so it'll continue that evolution. Karate and traditional Japanese Jiu-Jitsu and a lot of the other arts went the complete opposite direction after World War II. It was demilitarized, so to speak. The training methods the GIs brought back were kind of like what you would do if you were teaching 600 people at a time. Everybody line up, you guys see Enter the Dragon, and everybody's lined up, they're like, whoa! Well, that's exactly how the infantry, you train infantry. You had 300 infantry people, you're going to train them to bayonet somebody. It's a horrible training method, but if I have to train 500 people at the same time, that's what you do. But that's, you know, if samurai actually had to fight, they used the lions. Go back to the Greeks and pancration, and they had to roll. They use if you are working against a resisting opponent, you will use the training method I'm advocating, or you won't survive. You'll just lose over and over again. So, does that answer your question? Okay. Anything else?
Got one in the back.
Yep.
I don't think this would probably relate. When we think about like overpopulation.
I'm not going to pretend to know something I don't know. I don't know anything about that, I'm sorry. Yes?
Do you think like the best like fighting styles are in mixed martial arts or represented, or do you think there's like fighting styles that like don't want to be?
That's a good question. I do not think that there's any fighting styles that are not currently represented within the sport of mixed martial arts around the world that are functional and out there to be found and have yet to be discovered. And I say that only because I've traveled the world and been in martial arts all my life. I've never seen anything like that. There's always stories about that. So it's interesting. Anytime somebody argues for any form of superstition, traditional martial arts are included. There's only really three forms of argument. First they're going to argue it works. And you can see that one goes out the window pretty quick. And they'll say, okay, it doesn't work, but it's useful. That's the second argument, and then they attack the messenger. But there's three forms of proof, and the first one is anecdotal. The second one is historical, or the fallacy of authority, which is they've been doing it thousands of years, therefore it must work. No, therefore it must replicate. And the anecdotal one is what you get. So you can say, oh, there's a Silat master in Indonesia who I've heard can beat up 600 people and blah, blah, blah. And then when you go, it's not. So I'm open-minded about it. I'm a skeptic. I always try to keep an open mind. If all of a sudden we discover some small tribe in the Philippines and they develop some amazing fighting style, that'd be fantastic. If that's true, we'll use it. We will steal it. You'll have all kinds of fighters fly to the Philippines to learn from this guy. He'll be flown over to Las Vegas next week, and people will be going to his gym to learn it, and it'll become part of what we do. But I am skeptical it'll happen just because technology and the way the world is. I think we've seen most of it. Yes.
I'm not familiar with your gym, but you said you train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yes.
It seems like one of the flaws of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, though, is that it's specifically for one opponent or ground fighting.
Right.
And so you probably want to use like a distraction standing or something. I'm just curious about the way that you were talking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It seems like you're advocating a purity of form for that, and I'm just curious what you think about that.
No, I'm not advocating a purity of form. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a delivery system, so it's going to evolve. And as we find out, and it has evolved if you look over the last 20 years. When I first started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which was almost 20 years ago, it was different than it is now. And competitors bring in new forms of evolution. As far as street fighting, there is no good way to fight two people. It's just a fantasy. Do I want to fight on the ground if I get in a fight outside? If I'm outside in PSU and somebody attacks me, do I want to be on the ground? No. What's the best way to ensure I land on the ground? Don't know anything about ground fighting. The people who are the easiest in the world to take down are people that aren't grapplers. I mean, look at the first 3 UFCs with Royce Gracie. Anybody can take you down if you don't know anything about grappling, unless you're a wrestler. You want to not be taken down and learn wrestling. Get a good sprawl and hip in. Now, having said that, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu by itself alone is not enough probably anymore to enter and compete at a high level in mixed martial arts. You also need stand-up and you need clinch. And that's been something I've been advocating ever since the start. And those are the other delivery systems of boxing or Muay Thai and wrestling, Greco-Roman and freestyle wrestling. And the combination of the three together create what we call mixed martial arts. If you're only a ground fighter and the other person knows it, and you're going up against somebody that's a good wrestler with great hands, what are you going to do? He's going to sprawl on you and keep punching you in the face, or so forth and so on. So you need some combination of those three. For the average human being who lives in Portland, Oregon, who's probably not going to be attacked, hopefully, by a gang of people or whatever, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu will probably be enough for you to defend yourself and learn about what you can and can't do. And if you want to take it to another level and add stand-up and clinch, you can always do that. You'll have that foundation on the ground that you can build from. Yes?
We saw a video of a guy that got beat. I think he was doing some kind of capoeira, yeah, capoeira.
Yeah.
Yeah. This right off some kind of dance. Is it real?
No. It's a Brazilian form of dance. It's very cool. They kick upside down on their hands and stuff. Having said that, there was a match years ago where a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy got knocked out by a capoeira guy, but it was a right cross. He just came out and punched him in the face. That can happen to anybody. He wasn't upside down on his hands kicking him in the head. No. It is very cool to see. I would consider it a ritualized dance form. I think most honest capoeira instructors would hopefully tell you the same thing. Yes?
One more. Here, go ahead.
What if we don't want to do MMA for competition, but we want to do it to, be active, healthy, and we don't want to get hit in the face?
That is an outstanding point. I don't want to get hit in the face either. I put away my boxing gloves probably
Me too. Me too.
8 years ago. No, I have hundreds of students, and I have a tiny percentage that ever want to compete in mixed martial arts, as it should be. And one of my rules at my gym is I never push people to do any form of competition, in particular MMA, where you're walking into a cage door that's getting shut behind you. That's something that you have to train at the gym for quite a bit of time, express interest on your own, come to me or the other coaches and say you want to do it, and then we'll prepare you for it, but we never push that on people. So the majority of people do not train because they want to fight mixed martial arts. The majority of people come in and say they want to train because they want to learn self-defense. What they mean by self-defense is confidence, and they want to get in shape, and they are tired of going to 24-hour fitness and doing a boring workout. So they come into the gym, they get in great shape, they have a good time, they gain some confidence, they learn some fighting skills, but they're never going to take it to that extra level, and that's perfect. There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a really healthy way to go. I don't really advocate boxing for anybody. I think the evidence behind the brain damage to boxing is pretty conclusive. Now, if you want to learn how to fight stand-up, you need to box, but just be aware if you're going to get really good at it, you're probably going to be stupid later.
Time for one more question, the last one.
Yeah.
What do you think the effect of like Hollywood and media has had on martial arts, like, you know, the good and the bad?
Yeah, bad overall, good, it's good in a way because it drives traffic, I guess. The thing that there was two things I loved when I was a kid. This is my generation in particular. The first one was Bruce Lee. That's what got me into martial arts. I was banned from watching Bruce Lee when I was little because they thought he was evil or something. But the first time I saw Bruce Lee movie, I was like, oh my God, I want to do that. So I think he was fantastic for bringing people to martial arts. The second one was ninjas. Ninjas were cool when I was in high school. But having said that, overall, I think it gives people the wrong impression about fighting in general. But that's true. That's not just martial arts. That's just how Hollywood and the media portrays violence in general. Rarely do I ever watch. It's like, if you watch I imagine this is true if I was married to a doctor and I was watching a medical show and they did something in the ER, she'd go, that's ridiculous. They'd never do that. And every time I can't watch an action movie with my wife, what are they? Every single time. So just how they portray violence in general is glamorized. It's given it's glamorized, and so I think overall it's a bad impression. I would like to see R rating for violence instead of sex. I'd like to see violence when it's portrayed in the movie to be done the right way, which they kind of did in some war films, like Saving Private Ryan. If you see some of those scenes where they enter the beach, that's violence. Now, if you want to see what violence is like, watch that. There's nothing glamorous about it. I'd like to see that. I think it would change our society a bit instead of a cool action figure guy, but then again, I'm not making millions of dollars. So. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Matt's going to stick around for a few minutes. Let's take a break if you want.